when a bracket comes out, one of the first things I try to do is cross-offs, like no, like just like go through the regions, just like, okay, like I can make a case for so many teams, and you should be really open-minded in the tournament in general. It's a really good idea to be open-minded, but like this is one, there's a test basically where it's like, all right, if the team is, you look at like offense and defense rating, not adjusted, like what they actually did, not like somebody's adjustment based on who they played, what they actually did. Offense and defense, if you're 75th or worse in both, I like cross you off basically. And like those teams like never do any, they always get eliminated in the first round or in the second round. Sometimes they play another bad team like them and one of them has to win, whatever. So it's basically, if you just use that 75 test, like if we want to call it that, and you look at the last 10 years, there's only one team that's made the Final Four with that test. I was going to say, there's only one team that's in the last 10 years, and it's Syracuse.
All right, for both of you, if we can continue just to kind of roll on here, because this is, what we do. Every single year, I think we can all agree on this. Inevitably, we will have a conversation about a 1 or a 2 seed where we talk about favorable draws or, going out of their way to make sure they get to a certain round, like the way the committee examines everything. Like, is it fair to say we have these conversations every year?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, Kansas had one of the easiest regions ever assembled last year when the bracket actually came out. Right. So like that was definitely part of it. But the narrative last year going into the tournament was that Coach K would be given the really easy draw because it was his last season. And I know it worked out that way because Gonzaga lost, but he got the overall like number 1 seed so it didn't really play out that way. It was just Gonzaga lost to Arkansas before that actually happened.
Right. Okay. So the reason I bring that up is, for those who don't know, the Final Four this year is in Houston, and Houston is one of the 1 seeds, or maybe the number 1 overall 1 seed.
Yep.
Do you think that Houston is that team this year that you will look at as a 1 or a 2 seed where, look, they're not a traditional team the last few years at least. I mean, I know they have some history there of making runs to Final Fours because of where the Final Four is, knowing the internal city buzz that could be a brewing where that whole weekend will be hopping if Houston gets to a Final Four in their own city. Do you think Houston is that team you circle and say, don't be scared off on betting them if you're unfamiliar with them? They will have the draw of all draws getting through their side of the bracket. Do you think it'll come to that for Houston?
I actually think it's not that I have no opinion on this. I actually feel the opposite, that I think like there's a lot of things that are being overrated about that. So like if you think about so here's an argument someone could make, which would be a totally rational argument. Oh, well, like 2 games in Houston, like that'll be games 5 and 6 for them in trying to win the national championship. What a tremendous advantage that would be for Houston to be in that situation. If anybody's ever been to a Final Four before or a national championship game, it's kind of like going to a Super Bowl. It's not the same because there's a student section and it's got raised court. It's really weird, but it's a little bit like a Super Bowl in that it's kind of like, it's not corporate, but it's a really like fractured crowd would probably be the right way to put it. And there's a lot of Super Bowls where like, depending on how one of the fan bases travels, like I went to the Patriots Seahawks Super Bowl in Arizona, and Seattle's a notoriously loud fan base. And man, they tried to like create the same 12s environment, and you just can't. Like it's just not. They couldn't do it. They tried. Like they really tried more than most Super Bowl crowds. I feel like they tried. So like they get to kind of sleep in their beds and not travel a lot, but it's still such a weird situation. I think like them playing in Houston is like insanely overrated. I think it's like not a thing, basically. So I wouldn't make a bet for that reason. And I think it won't work opposite, but I really like it's very overrated. I think with Houston, the only other thing that I would bring up is they're the best team, but there's a little bit of like Gonzaga last year with this, where like their metric profile is going to look awesome because they play me, you, and Tyler sometimes. Yeah. And it's just, and they win 80-40. And like, it's brutal and gruesome. And like, it makes them look awesome. And they've made the tournament a bunch. And they usually end up in a game at some point along the way where they just like can't shoot. They just can't shoot. And they get got by somebody. And it was Villanova last year. So just, I could see it playing out the same way, I guess. Like, I don't even know if Houston's my favorite one. I might like some of the other ones more than that. I don't have them like head and shoulders above everybody else.
And now Tyler, I'll let you jump in on this one too. If it was not for, and you can't take it away, but if it was not for the controversy the last couple of weeks surrounding Brandon Miller, would Alabama actually be the team you like more? Like out of all of these? Like, is that what's holding you back on them?
What do you think, Tyler? You want to take that one first?
I would say yes if this stuff didn't happen, because you can make a direct correlation. As soon as this Brandon Miller news came out, they started dipping. They've played, I think, 2 overtime games during this stretch. They lost to Texas A&M, barely beat Arkansas. So I think without this stuff, Alabama would definitely be the 1 seed that I like the most at right now. But yeah, I mean, I'm still a Kansas believer as my number 1 seed, as the best one for me. But yeah, if this stuff didn't happen with Brandon Miller, I think Alabama would be the clear-cut number 1, at least for me.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. They have a couple things like historically. So you can look at one thing that probably people don't know as well is usually winning a title in most sports. I think we know this in the professional sports, but winning a title is kind of like a multi-year process. So like you have to be like a certain threshold, and then you take a step forward, and then you take a step forward, and like that's right. The team that presents as winning a title. And in college sports, I used to call this wave theory. I think with college football, like there's like building blocks to be able to get to the point to be a national title team. Well, it actually works the same in college basketball, even though there's so much player turnover and players, declare early for the NBA, whatever. Like there's still a stepping stone, like a step process that has to take place here. And Alabama and Purdue are like a little weird because this is a big step. Like it's a huge step. Like Alabama, people like forget how we talked about the team in the tournament last year. Like they were a 6 and they quit. And the coach was calling out everybody on the team for not defending ever, and like played different and benched players. And they lost to an 11. Like that was last year. Like this is a big step. Like Brandon Miller's awesome. That's why it can be a big step. But like this doesn't usually happen. So like you're gonna kind of look at them and be like, like okay, it could happen. And it's the same thing with Purdue. I know they've been there a bunch of times. They're like one of the worst defensive teams in the country last year. Usually you don't make like that big of a step. Usually it doesn't happen that way. But the thing about this year is every team's even more flawed than these. Like I said, it's a good group of ones. I don't mean that historically. I mean that in context. Like it's a good group of ones because the 2s, 3s, and 4s are garbage. Like that's why it's a good group of ones. Like it's not that the ones are good, it's that everybody stinks. I think this is like one of the worst years for talent and like just like feeling good about teams. So like the ones are only good because the 2s, 3s, and 4s, I'm just like, no way.
Okay, so on that note, on the 2, 3s, and 4s, a lightning rod team the last couple of years that as you said, maybe the semi more than casual observer hears zero buzz on, but would actually intrigue me more is Gonzaga, because for years you pointed out what's happening with Purdue now. Every time you think it's finally Gonzaga's year, and we saw it the last couple of years, number 1 seed or whatever, they ultimately will let you down. This year, still a really good season. Drew Timme must be a doctor by now with how long he's spent in college. He is still back. They win the WCC. They are not obviously going to be a top seed, but they'll be in that 2 to 4 range. Is the reason not to buy Gonzaga because you should never buy them, or is it actually work in reverse where you might actually find great value on betting them to either make the Final Four or, dare I say, end up in a national championship game and cut down the nets because now the pressure is semi off of them?
Sure. I mean, Tyler knows what I'm going to say here because it's in the open of the show. I'll say this first. If they won, it would be really funny because they've had such better teams and have done absolutely nothing. Yep. It would be like funny if if it's like this team is the one that does it. Like even make the Final Four. I feel like you'd laugh. Just like really this team versus the others? God, I mean, they've had so many good teams and come up short so many times. Obviously made the national title game and should have beat Carolina and lost. It's like still a perplexing title game.
Ken, let me just add a quick follow-up before we get Tyler in here. You say that it'll be funny, and that's fine because obviously I'm asking as a novice, but they're in the top 10. Actually, it's in front of me on the screen. They're in the top 10 as far as betting favorites for a national championship winner.
Oh,
so
yeah.
If the answer is it'll be really funny, are we saying there's really only, you think, 6 teams or so that actually can win the national championship? Maybe that's a secondary question after Tyler answers this, but that's kind of where I want to piggyback off of it.
Sure. Let me tell you why I think Gonzaga would be funny, and then maybe Tyler can tell you like how many teams can win the title, or maybe he think honestly, maybe Tyler thinks Gonzaga is different than what I think, and if he does, that's great actually. So there's like a type of team, and people that listen to the show have heard this before, but this is good because like this is a totally reasonable question. There, like Gonzaga is going to be a 3 seed. They're like whatever 20-1. Like you should ask why can't they win the national? That's a great question to ask, honestly. They will end up being one of the worst defensive teams in the tournament, almost period, really, actually. Like not even like of 3 seeds. Like some Gonzaga teams guard pretty well. If a Gonzaga team guards pretty well, those are the great teams. They always score. Like their offenses are always off the charts, basically. And the ones that guard tend to go really like have the, a big pedigree and be really, really favored to go deep in the tournament. This one stinks. I mean, it's maybe the worst one defensively. So they present as a type of team when you are like a really sexy offense, you score a ton of points, you make threes. People like that. Like that's appealing basketball, right? So those teams tend to get rated really highly because that's like we want to see that. We want teams high scores. We want to see like superstar players, all that stuff. If you don't guard at all, so all of your success is at the offensive end of the court, all of those teams fizzle early in the tournament with like basically no exception ever. So that's Gonzaga is that type of team. We call it a paper tiger on the show. So like, it's not that there's like, they can't win. Somebody will be the first one. Maybe it's them. It's just that like, if you're betting a tournament or you're filling out a bracket, you're playing probabilities, right? Like what type of team tends to do this? What type of team tends to do this? They're the type of team that tends to just flame out real fast. So like, that's why I say it would be funny if this is the one that did it, because this is like maybe the worst defensive one they've ever had.
All right, so to sum up this segment, before I have some other more interesting stuff on the next segment on this, how many teams can win a national championship this year?
Oh, man. Realistically, 5 maybe, I would say. Now, you could get
Only
a crazy
5.
winner. And to Tyler's point, you could have a crazy winner this year.
Yeah. Okay, but you think it's basically it's only going to be 4 1 seeds, but we talk about UCLA and Purdue. You think it's basically the 5 1 seeds?
Yeah, so I would say like the teams that I really actually could like, this isn't even like a math thing, like that I could picture winning and I would not be surprised. Houston, Alabama, Purdue, Kansas, UCLA. Okay. And that's with UCLA not having their 3rd best player for the rest of the tournament. Like they would be my favorite if they had Jalen Clark. So we can get into that. UCLA's 3rd best player is now out for the season, which is like a big deal. And so again, but people parachuting in, that's like the most significant injury of the tournament up to this point. So like, it's those 5. If you gave me any other team, even like UConn, who everybody loves, like I'd be pretty surprised if UConn won the national championship. So like I'll say like those 5, and if it's anybody else, I would actually be really surprised.